Should we kick off? Hello, and welcome to this Rail Community of Practice, so Responsible AI for Learning Community of Practice session, specifically on schools. I'm Jonathan Dempsey. I am the chair for this year of Rail and the learning lead of Learnovate's Diotima project. Thanks for coming. I think this is a really important and timely topic to be discussing, particularly around schools. A couple of housekeeping notes. We will be recording this session. We would appreciate if you didn't turn on any note takers for this particular session. And in the interest of accessibility, you may want to use live captions, and to use them, you just click the Show Captions or CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So our theme today is navigating risks of AI to unlock learning in schools. No, kind of not too hard a topic. We are really lucky to have a great speaker, Rita Bateson, who is co-founder of Eblana Learning. And Rita, you can introduce yourself a little bit more in a moment. We also have Joe Rayfus, founder of Facultie, among other things, and Darren Murphy, assistant prof from Hibernia College. And you guys, I'm sure you can introduce yourselves a little bit later on, which is great. So structure the session. We will have a presentation shortly from Rita. We will then have a panel discussion with Rita, Joe, and Darren and myself. We are then going to go to some breakout sessions, and really the purpose of that is to try and come away with something or things that you guys want to do as a result of this session. So bias to action, as Rita mentioned just before this session started. And then we'll come back, and what I'm going to ask you to do is bring your reflections back into the chat after the panel sessions, not during the panel sessions, because otherwise they will stay in the panel sessions. We'll have a few minutes just to bring those reflections back, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Please do participate in the chat during Rita's presentation, unless you find it distracting, in which case, Rita, you can tell them to stop. I'm fine with that. And really, we're here to really learn to exchange ideas and to collaborate. And with that, I will hand over to Rita.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's my honor to share kind of the learnings that we've had so far. Eblana is not a very old company. We're only 18 months old, but in AI terms, that's practically geriatric. As you can hear, I'm originally from Dublin, but I was away internationally for longer than I'd care to admit, almost 3 decades. And then returned home in 2018 to open an international school here in Dublin, which you might remember or you might not, because we got quite a lot of headlines at the time for being Ireland's most expensive school. But it gave me a chance to bring some of my international experience, the baccalaureate and so on. And then a couple of years ago, AI exploded onto the scene. And international schools are in a slightly different position than national schools in that they have a huge competitive pressure. They also have more capacity to innovate, and they often have funds and resources to do so. So we began in Eblana Learning 18 months ago, supporting schools, trying to figure out the right way forward, what is worth considering, what are the risks that they're entering into, how can they manage and mitigate those risks, and then on the positive side, what opportunities and innovations can we support them with, and how can they make the most of this opportunity? Because many schools were essentially lost for those first year and a half, 2 years. And even now, many of our schools that we work with report anxiety, overwhelm, productivity paradoxes. They're really excited about what it can do, and they're really terrified about what it means for education. So I'm speaking specifically from the international sector, and what we've developed over the last few years in conjunction with schools is the ability to become AI ready. And that's quite a tall order. It's a huge ask for schools, but it essentially requires you to understand the landscape, or the very AI word, isn't it, landscape, up there with navigate. Thinking about what is happening with other schools, what's happening with education, what's happening with ed tech. And what I quite liked to hear this morning was the term ad tech at William Fry. I found that really interesting and intriguing. So what are the trends that are happening to other schools? Because we never know what we don't know. What are the essential risks that AI presents? Let's get the bad stuff over with. Let's eat the vegetables first. What are the critical risks that we have to think about for those AI schools? And then how do we begin our governance and our policies while we're waiting for guidance from on high or the grown-ups to come into the room? What are we going to do at the moment in terms of our schools? Policies, procedures, investment in people, protections, and so on. And so that means for our international schools, we've tried to phase this work for them so that, because you can't do it all at once. I mean, you can try, and we have been trying, but it does need a much more cautious and conscientious approach, because we've made quite a lot of mistakes over the last few years as a society, whether it was social media, whether it's the advent of kind of rushed ed tech at times, or even just the innovations within the classroom and outside it. It's much more beneficial now to have a phased implementation in schools. You can't introduce AI into the curriculum until teachers are ready. You can't really get teachers ready until they're secure in the guardrails and the guidelines and the vision of the school. So it's really important. It's a very interconnected framework that we have. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to share some of the experiences, the pros and cons that our international schools are hearing, so that we can take those lessons for our national context or for our own personal information. Many of us have kids in the house. Some of us on the call have a leaving cert or two in the house, and it is an interesting time. And this is not a hype. This is not another crypto or blockchain or NFT or all of those things that I kind of was conveniently enough ignoring. This is different. And that doesn't mean that we haven't been here before. My father always used to say there's nothing new under the sun. And part of that is true when it comes to AI. There is endless research for us to access. But then, of course, there's always been endless research for us to access in education, and we prioritized. There are conflicting best practices. There is a huge regulatory compliance piece around the EU AI Act, around GDPR, around child safeguarding. Teachers, leaders, students, parents all have ethical and safety concerns to various degrees. Internationally, there's a huge problem with assessment. And I'm not speaking specifically about universities, but universities can tell their own tale in that regard. But for schools, I hear phrases like homework apocalypse. I hear teachers saying things like, what's the point in setting any work? If they're going to use AI to write it and I'm going to use AI to mark it, what are we doing here? Things like that. There's a huge pressure on teachers and leaders to upskill very quickly. There's a lack of involvement and engagement with parents often in the community. Parents looking to schools to see whether you're overusing it or underusing it. And I'm hearing now a lot of kids putting their teachers' work into AI detectors to see if they can catch them out on hypocrisy. So it's a really complicated nexus for schools. Nexus is another great AI word. So let's think about it from school leaders' perspective. What I'd like to share with you is a few of the lessons and learnings from different school leaders. And I often hear things like this when I enter schools, and we're working with more than 250 schools at the moment. And I hear essentially emotions around anxiety, overwhelm, and sometimes they come from very different places. From some schools, it's a fear of missing out and worrying that AI presents these amazing unlocks and I can't seem to access them. It seems to not be giving me what I need. There are schools that have a fear of messing up and just don't want to touch it. They're just going to wait until somebody else figures it out, let the dust settle, and then buy iPhone 3 or iPhone 4, not the first one. But in almost every single school I go into, there's an underlying desire to be doing the right thing if they just knew what that right thing was. If we could give them the rules of engagement and the safety tips and the best practices, then they'd make sure that was done. And then many of them will say, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't have time to figure it out. That's quite often a very common sentiment that I hear in schools. This is also very common. They say this off the record. I just need to get through the next few years. Just get me to retirement, get me out of here, and it's somebody else's problem. And I think that's also a bit of a concern in the educational space too. Now, what I like in terms of a vision or something to really aim for is that UNESCO has come out with a very balanced definition of what the teacher's role should be in this competency framework. The teachers must be the guardians of safe and ethical practice. And so far so good, so far so cautious, until you get to their statement around the classrooms must be AI rich. We want our kids experiencing AI-rich educational environments, not AI-saturated, not AI-dominated, but protectionist through richness. And they really want to make sure that we're doing that while ensuring the students' privacy and agency are protected and respected. And I think we could also throw dignity in there too, because students have a variety of opinions about AI, and we'll talk about more about that later on. So what we do with the schools is once they understand the trends that are happening internationally, which is AI overwhelm, sensitivity, energy crisis, systemic blindness around safeguarding, and all of the 1,001 things to worry about, then we like a bias to action, because there's no point in sitting there stressing and worrying about the impossible. A school leader's life is only possible if you can kind of segment your concerns and tackle as many as you can, and then know that you're doing the very best you can for your school. And so to do that, I've collated all of the case studies, all of the research, insofar as there is some, into this sector, and all of our experiences with schools. And it really helps schools to categorize the risk according to the levels of risk, like the EU AI Act does, but also according to the nature of the risk it presents to the school. And AI presents essentially 6 critical risks. As far as I can tell, and when it interfaces with education, this is where it appears the most. And that's based in these patterns and trends that I experience in schools. There is an increased friction in schools. And in the first year, that friction really looked like teachers worrying about student use. Assessments, projects, essays. Teachers report that they can open up a pile of marking and 20 of the essays might sound identical, and they're full of AI slop. Other teachers recommend that it's being incredibly powerful for tutors, and their next door neighbour doesn't allow it. And so students and teachers are having frictions within. We're also noticing that there's an irony around personalised feedback. Many schools internationally went straight for AI, especially in terms of report writing and lesson planning, and the students got annoyed. They got extremely annoyed because there was a blandness and a homogeneity to their lessons. They were starting to see the same kind of phrases and the same kind of ideology and the same kind of ideation in class after class, and their reports smacked of absolutely nothing. It didn't sound like the kids, it didn't sound like the teacher had even tried. And I think that is really ironic, that we say we can target it so much more carefully and so much more personally, and yet it feels impersonal. We have an ongoing issue in schools around emotional support. In international schools, students tend to be quite privileged, they tend to be quite affluent, and they tend to have a high level of access to technology. We're hearing already that students are wearing AI wearables into school, such as the Meta AI sunglasses with the stream and the Aura rings and the bracelets and the earrings that can record. So these kids have access to a high degree of technology with AI embedded. And they also have access to some of the best models, so that they don't need to talk to another student. They don't need to talk to a parent. They have a high degree of emotional support. Now, how this manifests in schools is that the counsellors in schools often tell me either no one is coming to them anymore, or they are coming to them, but they're coming with their own self-diagnoses or their own sycophantic reinforced behaviours. So I'm fighting with my friend, and I've asked ChatGPT, and they always tell me I'm right. I don't know why my friend won't listen. And this creates such a difficult dynamic in international schools. And we also see that there is this never-ending concern around academic integrity, which at first we thought was cheating, but now more and more it looks like dependency, where students are offloading their thinking, they're offloading their planning, their review, their editing. I'm sorry, the hailstones are really loud. I hope it's not coming through, particularly, but they're banging against the window. And here are the 6 critical risks you identify.
You're fine, Rita.
When you think about all of those impacts on AI, on the schools, we know that there's a legal frame, right? We know that there is an EU AI Act component that honestly schools are not familiar with. Most schools we talk to at first don't even know about it, but it is significant. There's a reputational damage for schools. There's also a societal impact of AI, which we're hearing more and more now about the concerns for future jobs, the concerns for employment, the concerns for credentialing. What does any of this mean? What does any of the knowledge acquisition value that we had historically translate into the future? I'd also like to talk a little bit about the environmental risks. I know I mention this a lot every chance I get, but it's important and we need to consider it. And our young people are mentioning it frequently. Those who choose not to use AI, it's often the number one reason they tell me. There's a financial imperative too for schools, and it is very, very risky to not spend where you need to spend and to choose to invest in time, energy, resources, and people. And last but not least is the pedagogic risk that it presents to schools across the board. And it's the one that we talk about probably the least. We worry about everything else except what does AI mean for our teaching and learning when we're in a shared space together in socially constructed knowledge situations. And I think those are really important. Those are the 6 risks I'm going to take you through very quickly. And it has stopped hailing, so that's fantastic. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is my favorite topic of all, so I'll get through that quickly before I lose the run of myself, which is the environmental cost. I think we know about it, we hear about it, we don't feel it yet. And I think for us in Dublin, it's specifically important because, as we saw in the Irish Times report recently, one data centre not very far from my house here in Blanchardstown uses the same power daily as 200,000 homes. And I think that's significant when you look at this map of data centres around Blanchardstown. When you think about, if I am based in Dublin 15 and right next to me, there are huge energy drains. I think they're 10 times more consuming than the nearest pharma factories up there. I think that was one statistic I read. When we aggregate all this demand, when we know that more than 50% of our energy is being dedicated to those data centres currently, and we know that growth is only going in one way, and it's breaking all of the power laws, all of the Moore's laws, then we have to ask ourselves, where is this infinite demand for energy going to be satiated? How are we going to break an addiction? How are we going to be conscious consumers? Because the environmental risks are really important. And in education, that's always been our commitment. Make students aware of these facts so that they can make better choices. Help them understand the world as clearly as possible so that they can impact change, or so that they can live their lives in a way that's in harmony with their values. So it's important that kids know that text generation is a relatively low energy, but it's frequently used, and increasingly so. A year ago, when I would observe kids, they could do maybe 10, 20 prompts during the school day. Now I'm seeing 200 to 300 prompts. And I know for a fact they're using them at that speed at home as well. When we think about image generation, it is moderate energy consumption, but it is growing so rapidly. And I'll share some statistics in a moment on that. But I can tell you in Blanchardstown, when a new model comes out, like that week of Nano Banana, oh boy, it was hard for me to get online. It was pulling, and I'm delighted that we're staying kind of fairly constant now at the moment. But it has a significant environmental risk, and it does present to the whole world. I think we're just unusual because we have such a high concentration here, and we can tell it. And when we project forward, as videos become better and consumption increases, as 3D world models start to become much more readily available, we will see high energy demand, advanced capabilities, and then you can understand why Google and SpaceX are trying to get data centers in space. Because of the cooling, because of the access to energy. It seems insane that we're in a world now where we're reopening nuclear power plants and sending up data centers into space. But that tells us of the demand and the compute cost. And so if we think about that for the moment, a couple of statistics I'd like to leave you with is that there were 15 billion images generated in 2024. And in 2025, the same number was in 3 weeks. And then in 2026, it took about 3 days to get to that total. And at the moment, I think Spotify says there's about 1 billion hours of AI generated music uploaded every month. So the frequency, the volume, and the speed of the energy adoption and consumption is significant. So let's think then about financial risks to schools. Schools are an expensive thing to run. Humans are expensive. The buildings are expensive, rates and everything else. When you think about it, there is a high level of investment happening in schools. In Ireland, it tends to be quite centralized, but it doesn't manifest like that internationally. So in international schools, and probably we'll see it increasingly here, is that our investment in our hardware is increasing. Some systems are changing to on-screen examinations, like the American AP and the International Baccalaureate. They're moving to on-screen assessments. And so schools need to have the infrastructure to be able to meet that demand. We also need to invest in training for people. So many teachers are crying out for good professional development. They don't know what they need, but they know they need something. And that always costs money. That always requires investment. And then there are unforeseen things like data breaches, legal fines. Again, more likely to be shouldered by the department here in Ireland, but significant. And when you think about the ASTI asking for an indemnity against AI misuse not being caught by their teachers, we're being asked similar questions by governing boards internationally. How should we protect ourselves? If a kid uses AI and we don't catch it, how do we stop parents suing us later? And I don't think that's what we expected this world to be in kind of a few years on from this amazing, incredibly powerful technology. There's also that regulatory risk. We open our schools to intense legal challenges and regulatory environments when we bring AI in anywhere, because education is classified as high risk, which initially I thought was a bit of an over-exaggeration, but now I understand that it is the highest of all risks. If you use AI to determine anything about a child's future, what could be more risky than that? Allowing a piece of work to be graded that affects their leaving cert, that affects their college application, that affects their future life, and there's been no human in the loop on that. That is a very, very difficult place to be in. So we need to think about those. And in every school, ideally, we would have an understanding of every single use of AI in the building. We would have it categorized and registered, and everybody would be well trained. But of course, that's not the case. We see this already. We see that there is a reputational risk with both overuse and underuse of AI. We're hearing how some teachers are point blank refusing to admit that it even exists. And they're basically accepting a level of professional negligence by not making best use of it for their kids when they can. If it could make their classroom environment richer, if it could help them to reach students in a way that they couldn't before, if it helps students with diagnosed medical or educational needs, then we absolutely have to do that. That's something that's kind of an imperative for us. But if we're not training our teachers and they make egregious, horrific mistakes around AI, like that poor Australian teacher who generated a worksheet from a class photo so kids could colour it in, she got ripped apart, both by the local Australian Educational Authority, but also online, where people just could not believe that she had fed kids' images into an AI LLM without consent, without consideration. And you can't really blame these people if they haven't been made aware of the concerns. We don't know what we don't know. And the biggest risk that we're seeing in classrooms at the moment is AI slop. And if you're not sure what AI slop is, open up LinkedIn for about 5 minutes and you'll find it, no doubt, because AI slop is something that requires more effort to consume than to create. And it is already changing how our students are writing, both towards and away from it. I noticed that I almost left a spelling mistake into an email recently on purpose because I wanted them to know it was a human thing. And I thought, what a ridiculous world I'm living in now. We want students to have a determination of quality, but off the record, we kind of want adults to do that too. There are many teachers who are unashamedly using it and thereby lowering the standards and expectations and normalizing that use in classrooms. So we have to be much more careful. So as you can see, it's things like it's not this, it's that, the repetition, the American accent sometimes, the sense that you are experiencing something that's very familiar because it's built on these huge data sets. And I hear it from students all the time. If I wanted AI feedback, I can get that for myself. I want it to be seen, to be read, to be heard. Don't they know that we know what they're doing is another common emotion. Don't they think we can't tell that they're all using it? They're seeing the same ideas, the same visuals, the same notebook LM infographics from classroom to classroom. And it is important that we think about that from the students' perspective, because all of these present a societal risk. The idea that all of these things can impact society hugely should not be a school's responsibility. It should not be our sole mission in life to tackle misinformation, to tackle childhood sexual abuse material online, and yet it always is. Ours is the responsibility to guard and protect and prepare those young people. So we have to think about all of those things, and they present a huge risk to education. Here's when you're at your absolute nadir, when people really get frustrated with AI, this is the kind of sentiment I hear from them. We're at a war with AI and we're losing it badly. And I think that's, for me, the biggest concern. We really want to uplift those teachers to say, this is nothing new. We have been here before. It's just super turbocharged. How are we going to bring those people back? Well, we need to think about what it means for pedagogy. And I'm aware that I'm eating up the time because I have so much to share on this topic, but I'll finish very quickly. In that the pedagogy is where we lose focus. We have to keep reminding ourselves that while the risks are scary, while the regulation and the compliance and the training and all of the opportunities and the innovations and the tools and the platforms, all those things are not as important as what happens in the classroom. The pedagogy is the most important thing. And to say AI will keep changing, absolutely it will. And that will affect our AI literacy. But what it won't affect is our AI ethical considerations. So if we think about technology came for knowledge. Knowledge used to be really expensive, scarce, and hard to acquire, and it's no longer that. And then we pivoted to skills in schools. How are we going to apply knowledge? How do we transfer? How do we do critical thinking? And AI came for that. So now we have to think what's left for us to frame and contextualize our experience and learning. It leaves us with attitudes, dispositions, flexibilities, and our ethical determination for life-worthy learning. And I think that's where we need to put our attention and our focuses now. We manage all those other risks, absolutely, but we counteract this risk more than anything else. because the urgent is always the enemy of the important. And this is really important. Pedagogy really has to sit at the heart of our schools. And I think that is where I'd like to stop very quickly and say that kids are certainly crying out for this. They're asking for leadership, for guidance, and for protection to a certain amount because they are frustrated with the use of AI. Jonathan, you mentioned the other night that young people are hating it, hating it for what it's taken away from them, the options, the entry-level jobs, the freedom to be themselves, the privacy. There's a lot of students who feel that way and are consistently using it. And they're so funny because I ask them, why are you using it now? Are you not worried about habits for life? They will say, oh, no. I'm just using it now to get through the next few years. I won't use it at college. I definitely won't use it at work. Oh, no. Because they are on a treadmill of completion. And I think we're at the same. So we need to be very, very careful. The students are using it every day for everything is what they tell me. It's not universally true, but it is a major concern. So those are the 6 risks that I wanted to share with you. I have gone over time, so I hope I haven't stolen from the breakout rooms. But I did want to give you a comprehensive insight into what other schools are experiencing, how people are manifesting these problems, what they're doing to tackle them. And then as we go through, I think it's important to, I should have put my contact details in. If you'd like to speak about any of those further, I'm very happy to share them. But I wanted you to see, I suppose, what's happening outside of our own bubble. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Rita, super. And we will share the slides afterwards so people can get your contact details, I presume, on those.
Yep, absolutely. I'll pop my LinkedIn and email on the chat as well.
Yeah, look, we're living in a very interesting time. There's a huge amount of change, and I love your emphasis on pedagogy and on teaching and learning. I mean, if the more information and insight we can get into schools and into classrooms, the better it will serve teaching and learning, right? Awareness is going to be the king, and we'll be able to address some of those issues of change if we have more context of what came before those changes, those ongoing huge changes. And your environmental points are very well made and stark. Listen, thanks, Rita. That's brilliant. We're gonna go to the panel, and so on our panel are Rita, joined by Joe Rayfus, as I said, and Darren Murphy. And I suppose what I'd like to start with is, Joe, can I ask you to introduce yourself and follow on from Rita's presentation and comment on what you see as the biggest challenge facing schools from your experience in Ireland, wearing multiple hats?
Hello again, everybody. So I'm a post-primary teacher. HSCL ARC before that, and also the founder of Facultie, and I coordinate the Maryland National Pilot for an AI-powered classroom assistant. And I recently published a paper on a pedagogical strategy for a national policy towards AI in education. So that's kind of my background. I wrote that paper with Barry Bennett, who some of you may be familiar with, the Instructional Leadership Program. The biggest challenge, I suppose, I'm going to pare it back a little bit because a lot of what Rita said was like literally, if it was to put together a PowerPoint, Rita, it wouldn't have been as good as your one, but it was all those key points as well. But I'm going to pare back just to give it a quick thought. I think for a long time we're talking about AI as a kind of a collective term, as if it's a singular entity. And I think what we need to get around to accepting and recognizing is that AI is a disjunctive term. So to put that very quickly in context, if I'm going doing my shopping and I put a bunch of bananas, a liter of milk, and a 4-pack of toilet roll in my basket, momentarily they're all collectively groceries. They all serve a very, very different purpose. And I suppose we need to start thinking about AI not as a collective term. We don't refer to the internet, though my father still does. But we talk about particular sites or particular software. It's the same with AI. We need to start thinking about it as particular tools to solve particular problems.
Thanks, Joe. Darren, I'm going to ask you to also introduce yourself and maybe just touch briefly on governance and practical governance measures that schools should potentially already have in place?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Jonathan, and good evening, everyone. So as Jonathan said, my name is Darren Murphy, and I'm one of the assistant professors in Hibernia College, and I primarily work on the PME post-primary, and the school placement modules are where I spend most of my time. Before that, just to give a bit of context, because I think it definitely colours our experience and our views on things, just to kind of give a lens of what I've come through. I was a post-primary teacher of maths and physics before that, and then spent best part of a decade in the support service working with teachers around curricular reform and things like that. So with the PDST. So now to answer the question. I think just like with any big change like this, if you arrive, and I'm kind of putting the lens of curricular reform and changes to teaching practices and pedagogies that were kind of maybe imposed, possibly too strong a word, but I think it might be the right in certain contexts. It often creates an innate negative reaction. Whether people have given a huge amount of thought, it's just kind of the natural instinct to revolt or to fight back. So I think one of the things around governance and kind of acceptable use policies and all that sort of stuff, that they're the kind of basics. But I think how you create those is what makes them effective or what makes them valuable. So I think if you're to take an example that we did recently with our students, so their last placement block, we kind of took the shackles off with generative AI and the student teachers, and we had a bit of a conversation about where do we keep some of the shackles on, and what do we allow the students to do. So instead of sitting around trying to figure that out ourselves, we went to the students, and we had sessions with each of the year groups and had conversations about what they feel is acceptable use of AI and what they feel isn't. There were things we thought they'd say, there's things we didn't think they'd say. But ultimately that fed into the structures and the governance that we created around use of generative AI while on school placement. And I think from the feedback from the students, they felt a little bit more on the inside because they had contributed to the framework or the governance, that it wasn't the powers that be have decided we can do this and we can't do this. And I think the saying goes for, I would argue, anything that you try to bring in somewhere, that you let the people who it's going to affect mostly contribute to the rules and the framework. And then likewise, it kind of spans out and you test it and you give it trial runs. But I think people who sit around and have a meeting and then decide that this is what we'll do and then just give that to everybody and say, right, that's what we're doing. That's when you come up with that innate reaction and that kind of structure. So I think it's a lot of what Rita kind of said about schools wanting to know certain ideas. And I think schools should create a space for the staff and the students to have those conversations about what we feel and how it impacts us.
Thanks, Darren. I suppose, you know, in the interest of prioritization, let me ask you, Rita, if you were to prioritize professional learning interventions for teachers and school leaders, where do you start?
For me, I've seen the most success probably with a balance and almost 50-50 between literacy and ethics, because the people who are super excited and who are experimenters and adopters, and maybe even tipping into reckless experimenters and adopters, they need that ethical grounding. They really need to make sure that they're very clear on privacy, consent, bias, hallucinations, mediocrity, like having that quality determination rather than just accepting kind of convincing or pleasing information. They need that grounding. And then your more cautious, sometimes cynical, sometimes effort sensitive colleagues, maybe they need the buoyancy of the literacy to see that there are genuinely amazing use cases, that there is an incredible productivity boon, that there are moments where it is changing your practice completely. So you need both of those things. Of course, I'd also throw in safeguarding. I'd also throw in sustainability. And then you start, this is the whole problem with curriculum, right? You keep layering things on. You never take anything away. But honestly, if you could show teachers 30% tools and 70% like just important thinking frames, important evaluative processes, deliberation, I think that's what we've seen kind of the most effective, because the doomsters get what they need. They get a bit of inspiration, and the reckless enthusiasts get what they need, which is a little bit of, you know, guardrails, guidance, and awareness of the risks that you are taking. That for me, I think, is the best starting intervention, because you're recognizing that all of those people are coming from a really good place. They all want the best for kids. They all want to make sure that they're all protecting something in their mind. And you need them all to move together as a body, and that's incredibly hard to do with teachers and with humans in general, but it's very, very hard to herd all of those people together into a single direction. So at least move them by degrees, give them iterative change, and I think that's where we've seen the most benefit, the most honest communication. Talk about a space, Darren, that made me think of that. Like, that space is moving slowly, but it's like the boiling frog analogy. You have to move it so that they don't notice that they're moving in the direction that you want them to go in, and giving everybody just a little of what they want and a lot of what they need, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you can do an amount all at once. Darren, would you add anything to that from Hibernia's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, and I think exactly what Rita said, like it's very incremental, which I suppose in some essences it helps because of the speed at which this stuff is changing and the knock-on effects that I think if we were to kind of jump in with this all singing, all dancing training plan, it very quickly become out of date and somewhat irrelevant. So I think the slower the better. But I do think I suppose we've made this mistake, I think, and I'm glad to hear Rita had touched on a few of the kind of general points around it, but around ed tech in the past, where we thought this is the silver bullet to fix everything in education, and we jump all in, and then it takes a year or two to realize we went a bit too far in, this isn't great, and then we start backtracking. And like, I mean, apologies for the non-maths people in the room, but there was a piece of software that came out around the time they changed the maths curriculum the last time called GeoGebra. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it became the all singing, all dancing tool that needed to be used. And there was amazing things to be done. There was programming courses for teachers being taught to use and everything. And 15 years later, we realized actually the best way to use this is we don't give anything pre-made and we just let the students work with a blank canvas. And it enhances thinking and it allows space for thinking. And the same with kind of iPads, where we all went iPad schools, one-to-one, best thing ever. And then you hear schools going backwards. So I think it is that idea of a slow incremental space to weigh up, well, what exactly does this thing do? And how is it going to benefit? And I think if you involve more people than just those above the teachers and the students in that conversation, the better.
Brilliant. Joe, let me bring you in here. So from a teacher to classroom perspective, can you talk about, what would you say is a key learning, a really important learning for the use of AI to enhance critical thinking rather than replacing it?
I think if we to look at what teaching is first, Jonathan, like teaching primarily is pedagogy, it's teaching and learning. The role of the teacher, though, has evolved from that, and there's all these add-ons that, you don't ask anybody why they want, when, you talk to a Leaving Cert student who's going on to do teaching or hoping to do teaching, you say, why do you want to be a teacher? And they say, because I love correcting copybooks on Saturdays. Like, that's not the reason they give it because teaching is a social experience. It's a nurturing experience. Okay. And that's the bit that kind of, that calling is based in a classroom. So it has to be a pedagogical led approach. It can't be, an out of class or a workload led approach. Unfortunately, if I was to survey every teacher and throw up a Mentimeter that every teacher got into, I'd say name an AI tool. I think the reality of it is we know that before or 5 big LLMs would appear on that Menti and nothing else, when the reality is there's literally hundreds of tools that's growing exponentially every day. I think, and perhaps this is where I would slightly deviate from what Darren said, I actually think there is a serious, I think there is a serious need for a rapid level of training. I don't think it's something that we can comfortably sit on, because the danger is people are figuring this out by themselves for trial and error. And I think that's where we're getting the slop. I think that's where we're getting the data breaches. I think that's where we're getting all of the ethical questions are arising. I think we do need, to focus on obviously the AI literacy side of it, but B, the ethical side of it. And I think it needs to be a national led strategy. I'm just not sure the normal methods of teacher CPD can actually handle it. I don't think a 2-hour class or a one day whole school, training is going to be adequate. So that's the bit that concerns me. Is that I think the response to this needs to be quite critical, because we're literally in danger of kind of ending up in the wild, wild west. That'll be very, very hard to come back from. We see it with social media, where the governance probably wasn't there, and now there is this scramble. And social media, like, I hear a lot of people making that comparison, and I don't mean to do it deliberately, because social media is a very, very small, simple thing compared to the potential that AI has. So I think if this gets out of the box, it's going to be impossible to put back in. So I do think we need to move quickly on this.
Okay, we're going to move to breakout sessions shortly, but I just want to ask each of you exactly the same question, and briefly, if you don't mind. I want to end on this part on a high note. What are you optimistic about, Joe?
Oh, you're going with me. I'm very optimistic Celtic will beat Hearts on Saturday, but in AI, and I've asked all the LLMs.
And they all agreed with you, did they, Joe?
No. But no, what am I optimistic about? I think teachers are naturally incredibly creative thinkers, and I think they're problem solvers. And I think we will, if there is a joint collective effort on this, and there is appropriate guidance, and there is the funding that needs to be provided, if that is provided, I actually think this AI will be hugely beneficial to pedagogy and teaching and learning.
Okay, cool. Darren?
Yeah, I think it's something very similar to Joe. Like, I think I gave the example of the iPads earlier, but like, I think AI has the potential to allow us to do things that maybe mightn't have been possible without it as teachers, and be that extra layer of creativity, and maybe support people who aren't naturally creative and kind of help them do that. So I always remember talking to people about that idea, the SAMR model, when it comes to use of technology in education. And I think if we think of AI as a tool and where it sits there, I think then we're into kind of effective and ethical use cases. So yeah, I think unlocking areas of our minds that maybe we didn't have before.
Cool. Rita?
I think, yeah, I agree with both of those things, and probably even more so, it's a data gold rush right now, isn't it? With AI and that makes us both consumer and consumed. But when I look at the kids pushing back, when I look at teachers pushing back, like, all for a very good reason. So I'm very optimistic about the fact that there are gold nuggets in there. There's situations where kids are doing community service projects and they're colorizing photographs for dementia patients, and like, that's an amazing opportunity. There are blind kids who are telling me that, like, not to have to ask someone for help and using their AI for agency is just a world away from where they were 5 minutes ago. Like, my daughter's diabetic, we can analyze her data together, she and I, and she can have ownership of all of that. I think it's really, that is the bit where we're underselling the fact that it gives democratic access for now to a huge amount of power and empowerment. And I think that is what I'm most optimistic. I'm second most optimistic about the fact that, the human capacity for boredom is incredibly low. So I think the fact that the AI will generate so much of the same stuff, and you look at napkin diagrams and you're like, that's amazing. And then 5 minutes later, everyone's doing it and I'm over it. I think that really gives me hope and optimism, because that keeps that human AI balance where I feel like it should be, where we take all of the good and we take those lessons. And what Darren and Joe are saying is absolutely true. We have been given such a golden opportunity. We didn't learn our lesson during, initial ed tech. We did not take the opportunity COVID gave us to reimagine education. And likewise, social media. We just kept layering things on and patching and working around the edges. If this is the final push to actually rethink assessment, to genuinely investigate what pedagogy is even for and why we're doing it this way, then I'm all for that. And I'm also very aware of the fact that if none of those things worked, then maybe education's not all that broken. Maybe it's time to accept that and then think better and wider about what it is that we're doing on the daily, because the world keeps changing. And yet, the second we could get back in the classroom, we rushed in. We put on masks, we taught with masks on, and I will never do that again because it was the worst experience of my life, but educational experience. But I think that's where I get optimism from. We want to be together. We want to learn together. We're willing to pay to go and watch people record podcasts in a room because the human condition wants us to be together. So that's why I'm probably second most optimistic about.
Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to go to breakout rooms, and the panel, thanks Darren, Joe and Rita, we're going to join rooms and participate in the discussion. What I'd ask you to do is really I'm going to simplify it a little bit. I'm going to ask you to, from each room, bring back at least one action that you're going to do. And if you can't find an action, then it's a reflection. So there's you can have your cake and eat it. We'll see you in the breakout rooms. We'll come out of the breakout room strictly a few minutes before, which will give you time to put your actions and reflections into the chat that we'll gather and share afterwards, along with the recording and the slides. See you soon. Thanks for your participation in the breakout rooms. I'll say the same to everybody here that I said in our particular very good breakout room. Can you please put your learnings, so your actions or your reflections, into the chat? We'll share them afterwards.